Kingdom Hearts Union Cross Dark Road is the latest entry in the beloved Kingdom Hearts series, released worldwide on June 22, 2020 for iOS and Android mobile devices. Despite being a separate game, Dark Road is part of the Union Cross application itself, so to download it you'll first need to download Union Cross and access Dark Road through that. The game is set several decades before the original Kingdom Hearts, and an undetermined time after the events of Union Cross, focusing on the backstory and origin of Xehanort, the main antagonist of Kingdom Hearts Birth by Sleep, Dream Drop Distance, and Kingdom Hearts 3, as well as potentially expanding on some of the lore first established in Union Cross, which is allegedly setting up the next main storyline in the Kingdom Hearts franchise as a whole, and is probably going to be very important. Before we go into my thoughts on Dark Road though, it's probably best to go over my thoughts regarding Union Cross itself, the game that Dark Road branches off from and shares the same map with. Union Cross is a mobile MMORPG that tells the story of the age of Keyblade wielders, years before the events of the main Kingdom Hearts series itself. Sadly, the gameplay is pretty monotonous, and whilst it has been tweaked since it originally released, the way developers handled power creep and difficulty just involves increasing buff and debuff caps, releasing new gacha medals to take advantage of the rising caps, as well as upgrading Keyblades, adding skills to attack medals, and so on, which makes it pretty much impossible to complete a lot of the special events in the game without spending any money. And as such, it just makes you feel bad, not because you're playing the game badly, but because you're not obnoxiously spending hundreds of dollars on a shitty gacha mobile game. The pacing is also quite horrendous. They've gotten better at pacing main story quests over the last year, especially with the inclusion of allowing people to skip quests that don't contain cutscenes, but the fact that the story doesn't really properly start until you get about 300 to 400 quests in is indicative of the problems the structure of the game has. It also doesn't help that, except for maybe the Wreck-It Ralph world, all the Disney worlds are done a disservice here. For example, you'll spend about a third of the game's story quest searching Agrabah for Abu, and it's exactly as tedious, boring and mind-numbing as it sounds. It's why whenever you talk to a Kingdom Hearts fan that plays Union Cross, they'll go into a rabid fit at the first mention of Agrabah. It's just that bad. The story though is surprisingly great, and I think that's ultimately what makes Union Cross such a disappointing game to me. The story and lore have the potential to be the best in the entire series, yet because it's trapped on such an unenjoyable money-grubbing slog of a game, with some of the worst Disney worlds and told in such an asinine way, it just makes me sad that the story isn't being told in a better game. Anyway, I think that's enough sorrowful disappointment. Let's move on to Dark Road, where I'll go into even more sorrowful disappointment. Damn it. The game opens with a cutscene set on the Destiny Islands, where series antagonist Xehanort dreams of the player character from Union Cross and the Keyblade War, when a mysterious shrouded person in a cloak appears to lead Xehanort to Skala ad Kylam, where he becomes a Keyblade wielder. Fans of the series will know that the cloaked figure is in fact a future version of Xehanort who travelled back in time to set the events of the series in motion, which was pretty stupid then, and it's pretty stupid now. As a Keyblade wielder, Xehanort trains under the watchful eye of Master Odin, alongside his friends and fellow Keyblade wielders Ericus, Hermod, Vor, Erd and Bragi. There's also a 7th student known as Balder, however he has only been mentioned thus far in the story and hasn't actually been shown. The story focuses on Xehanort, Ericus and their friends, with the first episode of the story involving them exploring the worlds looking for other Keyblade wielders, who went missing whilst training for their Mark of Mastery exam, the test that decides whether one becomes a Keyblade Master or not. The episode ends with a random 4-year time skip that comes out of nowhere, where Xehanort leaves Skala ad Kylam, despite Ericus pleading with him to stay. After tending to a set of graves, implying that perhaps the other Keyblade wielders and their friends perished. The time skip comes out of nowhere and doesn't really connect with the rest of the plot very well, so it feels more like a pathetic attempt to create tension within the bare bones plot and keep people interested than a genuinely interesting plot development. If the time skip had happened after several more story cutscenes, maybe it would be better, but that's not the case, and so far the story has left me quite disappointed. There is also at present not a theatre mode in the game to allow you to rewatch cutscenes, and since the story quests unlike in Union Cross aren't repeatable, there is at present no way to let you rewatch the cutscenes again in the game itself. It's not too big of a deal breaker at the moment due to how bare bones the plot is, but it's still a bit disappointing to see it omitted. The gameplay in Dark Road adopts a card-based system somewhat similar to the one present in Kingdom Hearts Chain of Memories on the Game Boy Advance, though the version used in Dark Road is a lot more simplistic and lacking in a lot of real depth. You have a deck of about 25 to 30 cards in total, with 5 cards being available per turn in combat. The way the combat works is that you pick 3 cards from the 5 available to attack, accruing a bonus damage multiplier for using cards of the same colour. The attack type is determined by which card is chosen first, so for example if you pick a card with sliding dash on it followed by 2 cards that just say attack, Xehanort will use a sliding dash attack on the enemy. From my experience, using the named moves or spells instead of the regular attack cards tend to do more damage, but that may differ depending on the enemy. The combat itself is in my opinion way too simplistic, which may be good for a mobile game, but once I realised that setting the game to auto would automatically pick out the best hands from the deck and play the game for me almost always optimally, I just left my phone on the side as the game played itself, especially as some of the main story quests are kind of grindy and tedious. One for example asks you to kill about 500 enemies, then 500 enemies in Agrabah alone, and then 500 in Wonderland, which could take hours to do if I did it myself, and it would be very boring and tedious. Or I could just set the game to auto and Xehanort would complete the objective in half the time, and I could do other more interesting things with my time as it was being done. You also have 2 extra party members, Ericus, who is currently mandatory and required for the story, and your choice of one of the other Keyblade wielders. I personally chose Vor, but you can choose whoever you want, each with their own benefit. These party members can perform actions during combat same as you, but from my experience they mostly just buff Xehanort, though some do attack and cast magic spells, so choosing a party member who will buff you to fit your playstyle may be optimal. At present the game only contains 3 worlds, with Scala ad Caelum only being accessible in cutscenes, and Agrabah and Wonderland being fully playable, with multiple unlockable difficulty levels. The difficulty in the game only really consists of higher level enemies, with higher tiers of difficulty requiring absurd levels of grinding to be able to come even close to clearing it. Better cards can be obtained from completing in-game challenges, or from the in-game store, where special tickets, or the Union Cross currency of jewels, can be used to purchase more cards. From my experience, you can get through all the content currently in the game with only 1 or 2 10-card purchases from the store, and since you're given enough jewels upon starting Dark Road to purchase a full 10-card pool, and you obtain more jewels through challenges as you progress through the game, it thankfully shouldn't require you to spend any money to progress in the game. That may change in the future when more content is released. When you reach the main menu, your current objective will be displayed in the top right corner of the screen, with a red quest icon if there's a main story level to complete, which upon clicking will take you to that quest, which usually just involves fighting hearts for a certain amount of rounds. Usually though, quests just involve killing a certain number of enemies in a world, or obtaining a certain amount of BP, the game's version of experience points, which you can use to level up Xehanort. To complete these quests, you select a world and difficulty level, Then select the World Quest icon, which will put you in an endless fight against hordes of Heartless, only ending if you die or if you hit the back button to return to the menu. I have noticed though that if you set the game to auto on some of the lower difficulty levels, as long as you have a deck that isn't completely made up of blank cards, you will almost never die, which erases any real sense of challenge and just makes everything a tedious slog to get through. The higher difficulty levels aren't particularly more difficult in terms of mechanics or requiring skill to complete either, as the only differences between difficulty levels is the average level of the Heartless you fight in that location, as the game is too simplistic to be able to allow for any real strategy or skill, which makes the whole difficulty level system in general feel kinda pointless, because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how good you are at the game, or what cards you've got. If Xehanort's level isn't high enough, which becomes exponentially more grindy and tedious to do as you level them up, you have no chance of clearing the harder content without spending hours and hours and hours of your free time. The soundtrack is good, as expected from a Kingdom Hearts game. However, there are no new compositions to be found, instead reusing music tracks found in Union Cross and Free, which is a little disappointing, especially considering the Union Cross tracks are mostly reused from other Kingdom Hearts games anyway. Though, to be fair, it's completely expected. The issue with the soundtrack, which is the same issue present in Union Cross, is that most, if not all of the music wasn't really designed with repetition in mind, as the tracks were only meant to be present in small portions of their origin games, whereas here they're present constantly, so you'll more than likely be putting your phone on mute after a while as the repetitious nature of the Wonderland and Agrabah battle themes begin to affect your sanity. The art style was alright, adopting the same general chibi-ish art style present in Union Cross, but with the same flaws. It's fine for combat sections of the game and for the general presentation of the game as a whole, however I feel like the art style doesn't tend to translate well for cutscenes, perhaps due to the serious tone of the story clashing with the simplistic artwork, or just a general lack of any real cinematography making the scenes look static and lacking in emotional depth. Though I suppose I should give them a little slack, because apparently they only have 2 people animating the bloody cutscenes for the game according to Nomura. Regarding the amount of content in the game at launch, it's honestly quite laughable how little there is on offer considering the development time. Aside from story content, there are currently only 5 event quests in the game. The first being a BP event that can be done 10 times a day, provided you have an event key, a type of currency obtained through jewels or from in-game challenges. There is also a mission where you must kill a certain number of enemies without dying. And then 3 event missions of escalating difficulty where you just have to kill all the enemies for a reward. Most of these events exceed a difficulty way past the story content, but not because it requires you to think or strategize as the gameplay is too simplistic, but rather just because the enemy levels are way past where the current story content requires, so you'll need to really heavily grind or get lucky on card pulls to be strong enough to clear it. And when I say heavily grind, I mean you'd need to grind like 30 levels and reach the level cap of 50 to clear. The events themselves aren't really that interesting anyway, and just primarily reuse enemies that you fight regularly in the rest of the game. There is also no indication that these are timed events, so it's possible that the expectation is that you'll play the game for months to eventually be leveled enough to clear it, but considering the rest of the content in the game is only just enough to keep someone busy for 2, maybe 3 hours, I feel like they probably should have focused on ensuring that the basic content had enough depth to it first. As I was writing this video, the first timed event released added a week after the game's launch, and it's very lackluster. It's just a fight against 10 watermelon-themed Heartless, with the final one being an overpowered level 50 boss, which considering most people at this point will only be around level 20 to 25 with extensive obsessive grinding, It's borderline impossible to beat unless you get locked out and required a bunch of magic cards. The event itself also requires you to grind, as the rewards, which include a fairly weak and almost useless King Mickey card, are only obtained from killing a certain amount of those enemies, with the final rewards only unlocking from killing 5,000 of the smaller watermelons and 50 of the big ones, which require hours of time investment repeating the quest over and over and over again, which is just not what anyone should ever want to spend their free time on, to be brutally honest. There are also several in-game challenges, including weekly and monthly challenges that task you with completing tasks, mostly just consisting of reaching a certain level, killing a certain amount of enemies, or clearing a certain story quest that reward you with varying different forms of currency. In terms of actual story content though, the game is severely lacking. The story at launch only has one episode, with about 20 story quests total, mostly consisting of long, tedious and dull objectives, with only about 4 to 5 cutscenes of varying lengths spread in between, with the only ones of any real substance being the first and final cutscenes, though even then they are short and lacking a lot of context or depth. In total, you could probably clear all the story content present in the game at launch within 1 to 2 hours, if that, though unless you're a die-hard Kingdom Hearts fan, I think the dull gameplay and tedious quest objectives would put you off way before then. In conclusion, my first impressions of Auto Road are understandably very negative. The content in the game at present is completely bare bones, with only 20 grind-heavy story quests and barely any extra modes or gameplay to keep one interested. The art style, whilst cute and well suited for the mobile platform the game can be found on, is too simplistic and cute for any of the more dramatic moments of the story to carry much weight. The music, whilst incredible as always, as expected from the series, is completely made up of reused tracks with nothing original for the game to call its own, which can be said about most of the assets and worlds used in the game, which most are directly taken from Union Cross, which in turn are taken from other Kingdom Hearts games. The story itself is fairly non-existent at present, and what there is fairly uninteresting and unexciting. That being said, there is always the chance that future content updates could make the game more tolerable, whether through more interesting story updates or gameplay alterations. I'll keep an eye on the game like I do for all Kingdom Hearts related media, but I honestly have no optimism that this game will ever be anything I could consider remotely good, which is a shame because the Kingdom Hearts series is one I absolutely adore, maybe more so than any other video game franchise. So to see something as dire and repulsive as this, especially since it's canon to story of the other titles, is quite saddening to me. Thankfully though, we have Melody of Memory to look forward to later in the year, which will hopefully heal the wound that Auto Road has left in my heart. But until then, this has been Kingdom H, and this is my first impressions of Kingdom Hearts Union Cross Auto Road. Thank you for watching, and may your heart be your guiding key.